We're lucky today to have Zico Coronel with us. Zico is a coach from New Zealand, currently the professional coach for Hawke's Bay in the NBL of New Zealand, and has tons of experience at various levels of basketball in New Zealand. And as you'll learn here, he's also a world traveler and a lifelong learner, which is wonderful for us because he's going to share a lot of things for us as well. But Zico, first off, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me. It's an honor to be included. Such a great list of people you've had on the podcast. People wonder who this bum is this week compared to them, but hopefully we'll do them justice.
Well, and that's the beautiful thing about this podcast is even if they've never heard about you, they will now, and they'll learn so much from you as I have our time together and knowing each other as well. But Coach, what were some of your takeaways from your travels through North America? Let's first start with the Houston Rockets, since that would be the thing that would be most interesting to people.
Possibly no team in the world plays truer to their theory of basketball. Everyone now believes free throws, layups, and threes are the most efficient shots, but they take 3% of their shots from outside the non-rim too. So they're basically adhering to their theory. And then they extend their coaching so much beyond just telling the players that we want to take layups and threes. Every single thing that they do within their individual practice, within their team practice, their tactics, their spacing, where they set the screens, the angle of the screens, the location of the screens, and so on, every single thing is geared towards generating the shot profile that they want. And you can see it when they play a game. They very much adhere to their theory.
Now, when we talk about the Houston Rockets, let's talk about their team practice, because you went during a time of year where they actually did have some team practices. What kind of things do we see in the team practice? Are they doing a lot of 5-on-5? Are they doing a lot of breakdown? What type of things are happening in a team practice? And then we'll talk a little bit about some of their individual workout stuff.
So this was during a period where they had a homestand. So a lot of the practice was geared towards preparing for the upcoming opponent. So they would be doing 3-on-3 versus coaching staff, defending certain actions of the upcoming opponent. And then that would often lead to going 3-on-0 into different options in their transition and their different plays. They would have multiple coaches at the far end as well. So every single player within that drill would get the particular shot that they would get within that play context. They were working a lot at that time on 5-on-5 half-court defense, investigating what defensive scheme they would use and where they were going to find success with new personnel. And in that regard, they were very, very exacting about getting the coverage right. If the team didn't communicate and execute the defensive coverage correctly, then they would stop and they would have to play defense again and again and again until they got it right. And only then would they get the chance to win offense, irrespective of whether they got a stop or not. Did they execute the coverage?
Well, and you went during, if I remember, October, right? The end of October?
Yes, they were in basically their first 5 to 10 games of the season.
Right. So again, you found them at a time of year when they're still building, they're still developing, they're still adding concepts and trying to, again, get their defense, as you said, mostly refined. But so in terms of that practice profile, mainly focused on scout and specific opponent scout. Now, you also saw them do individual workouts, which I think is the part that stood out the most for you, is how hard those players work. Because as I've said, and you've corrected me, is it's a kind of a misnomer to say that they don't practice. They practice, and they practice really hard, just in a different way than maybe we think about traditional practice.
Yeah, they have basically schedules, and that schedule will maybe be over a 2-hour period. And for the coaches, you're out there on the floor for a considerable period of time, and then different guys just come through, and they maybe will be out for half an hour of physical preparation with the strength and conditioning staff, and then straight out onto the floor with half an hour with the coaches. They have such a depth of competent personnel that you might have one player at one end, one player at the other end, and they each have 3 or 4 coaches working with them, simulating the defenders, rebounding, passing. The players basically have the luxury of always doing the thing that's most important to their development at that time. They never have to rebound for their teammate and get 50% of efficiency out of their practice time. It's obviously a luxury they have of being an NBA team and having so many competent coaches who can assist that process. Individuals, it's completely geared to that shot profile. So they never work on a one dribble pull-up or a mid-range. So typical sequence might be a catch and shoot 3, up fake, side dribble 3, right, left, 1 bounce inside the 3-point line, step back, right, left, 3. So they're always working on that shot profile. They're not going to create any negative transfer.
Well, it's interesting because like we're saying specificity of training, like working on exactly what you need to work on to be effective in the game. If we're looking at a player like James Harden, is he training the shots that we see him take within those individual workouts?
What James does at training is kind of mind-boggling. They have some drills that they get him to do, and basically the main rationale is if we give him basketball drills, they're too easy for him. So we have to continually rack our brain to try to come up with things that are challenging for him. And yeah, he works on those things. He talks about wrist action, and it's quite comical. They quite often have an assistant coach or a player development intern stationed to his sides, and then he works on all those crazy handles that he does. And if every now and then he loses the handle, which does happen because he's pushing right at the limit of what basketball is possible at the moment, they just flip it straight back to him and he's right back into a sequence. So they're very time efficient. But it's certainly interesting in terms of a growth mindset type perspective. I mean, he makes mistakes at practice because they're continually pushing the limits.
So those two takeaways are that one, he does those things and he does them in a way where he's okay making mistakes and he's okay challenging himself, which is such an important message for all players and coaches to understand, because it's really our job to load players so that they do make mistakes, because that's what triggers learning. But then the second thing is if he loses the ball, they have another ball right there for him. So he never has to chase his ball. So the efficiency of his time is not wasted.
Yes, and that's the whole setup basically, is to be time efficient. And it happens like clockwork.
And in terms of then connecting things that you saw, because you saw them play, you saw them go through scouts, were they able to transfer a lot of the things that you saw from the team practices, the individual practices, and then into the game? You saw a lot of transfer?
They have great transfer. They have a very, very clear idea of how they want to play. And from that clarity comes confidence and aggression. And, you know, I mean, some of it for them is probably easier because they don't have as many moving parts as, say, a Utah would. And I utilize the terminology snipers. You know, they're sitting, they're ready, they're waiting, they're looking for the opportunity. And when the time comes, they have to make the shot. And generally for Houston, 3 of the 5 players are probably in that role. So it's kind of easy for them to do the right thing.
Well, I was going to say that confidence comes from complete understanding, but also from simplicity. Like it's a really, and this is not to diminish the system, it's actually to celebrate it, that there's a real simplicity to what they do, but the complexities of executing it against defense is really, really high. Is that fair to say?
And I think it also comes back to really considering what shots are good shots. How often traditionally has someone run an offense that involves someone setting a back screen, coming off a screen-to-screener action, catching the ball, pivoting through 180 degrees with all their momentum, angular rotation involved, and they shoot the ball, and we consider that to be a beautiful possession of offense and a good shot. And yet when you think of that from a skill execution standpoint, there's a lot of difficulty there biomechanically. And yet if someone comes down with the angle of their body perfectly to the rim, they're sprinting in transition, their momentum is all towards the target, and they get an on-time, on-target pass for a rhythm 3 in transition, and they shoot it with 22 seconds or 21 seconds on the shot clock, it's perceived as a bad shot. But biomechanically, it's so much easier than coming off a triple post screen-to-screener action and shooting the three against a shirt tail. So they have a lot of confidence, but they also are taking biomechanically easy shots.
Well, it's a great point, and it raises the question for me, like beyond the shot profile that they want, what type of other things were they doing to evaluate the quality of the shot? Contested, uncontested, whether Harden shoots it or other players shoot it? Is there a different definition? Did you examine that at all while you were down there?
They have the great benefit of having the tracking cameras, of course, in the NBA, and that gives them just an immense amount of ability to quantitatively assess the quality of the shots. So they very much talk about expected shot value. So they look and basically say, what was the quality of the shots that we generated? Was it better than the quality of the shots that the opposition generated? And effectively, they're able to work out, did we have shooting luck? Did we have shooting bad luck? The joke was kind of made that unexpected shot value, they won a championship last year. They had extreme shooting bad luck in game 7.
Extreme bad luck. But that's kind of what I'm getting at, is that I think too often we define shot selection based on success. And as you said, bad luck, good luck, that's a part of it, because sometimes you make shots and you miss shots. And they seem to be that profile of a team where, it's kind of obvious based on how, the type of shots that they're selecting, whether they're making or missing. And I don't think they would walk, and maybe you can correct me, but I don't think they walk away from that game 7 thinking they did anything wrong. They took the right shots.
Yeah, by theory, they believe they play the right way. I think it's very, very important, as you spoke about, that you determine shot selection by process and not result. And I think one of the ways that you can allow your players to have trust that that is exactly how you are evaluating them is that you offer them praise while the ball is still in the air or as early as possible. So at our practices, if someone takes a shot that we deem to be good, we would like that feedback from the coaches to be, wow, that's in flight. They should already be hearing good shot, good shot. And if we've given them that feedback on it prior to it even getting to the rim, there's no doubt that we're basing it on decision as opposed to result.
Well, I hope the coaches who are listening rewind that part, write it down, because that's such a key thing to be able to understand, to be able to help your players understand. Again, whatever you emphasize, that it's not based on outcome alone, that we want to make sure that we're shooting the type of shots because we believe that's what suits our personnel, that's what suits our system, and that's what suits our philosophy. So that's outstanding. Coach, any other takeaways from the Rockets, maybe in terms of scouting report or different things that they did?
They have such a depth of personnel, and so if any of us are lucky enough one day to be coordinating an NBA staff, that's the challenge in many ways for the head coach, is to make sure it's all coordinated. They have so many competent people, and just making sure that those people are not overlapping in all the man hours and the work and the time that they have. So that was really interesting for me to see, and a challenge to try to build the depth of competency in our coaching staff back home. And we can't replicate it, but can we be flexible enough in our thinking to create some of the benefits they have, even with much smaller number of personnel, which as a New Zealand coach, a growing basketball nation, it's a great place to grow as a coach because we so often have to really try to make the most and the best of limited resources.
Well, in a sense, you have to do it all. And that's a part of your development as a coach, which is both helpful and to a certain extent a hindrance. But if you can maximize it, it's obviously a positive in your development. Coach, you've been so many places over the years. Obviously, Spain, you've visited Barcelona, Valencia, you've been in Australia, you've been so many places in terms of your learning. How do you decide what to use and what not to use? Like, what is some advice to coaches? Because again, clearly we're in an age of tremendous data and tremendous resources for a basketball coach. But what are some pieces of advice you can give coaches about what to use and what not to use?
Wade Gilbert is a coach development guru, I guess, not a basketball coach, but he does have a very good book coaching better every season. And he basically starts that with talking about having a very clear understanding of your purpose, I guess your mission statement as a coach. So I think that having a really clear idea of why you're coaching, that allows you to kind of navigate that. And then having a really clear belief about how you believe basketball should be played. You may not always be able to realize that ideal because of adaptations for your personnel, but I think that that allows you to evaluate all the good ideas. One of the things that's beautiful about basketball is there are 1,000 correct solutions, but we have to unify as a team pursuing a singular solution. And, you know, that's part of that cooperation that you have to build with your players, who often at the pro level have very, very good ideas based on their experience, but you can't do all of them.
Coach, what were maybe some of the other takeaways from some of the other practices that you visited? I mean, you know, you got a chance to see, obviously, Dwayne Casey, John Beeline, a bunch of other places. What were some of the other takeaways? Because all very different types of practices, too, to a certain extent, right?
I think Michigan Men was interesting because probably more than any college team I've ever observed, it was like a pro training. Like they probably used an hour to an hour 15, which was effectively Scout D live, but it was preparing for a specific opponent. And college teams are almost on the other end of that habitual adaptability continuum in terms of they're just doing what they do. So that was really interesting to see. And when you were seeing Michigan just locking people up this year, you know, maybe that's a reflection of that. So that was quite interesting to see differently. That was probably a standout.
And Michigan mainly practiced a lot of offense versus defense, a lot of 5-on-5. Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, it was Coach Luke pretty much building the scout team. So they'd be having maybe breakdown drills with the first, second unit, would be doing individual skill breakdowns, while Coach Luke was making sure that the third unit was prepared with, you know, whatever's next, their X series of the upcoming opponent or whatever. And then once he basically had them ready, then they would be coming back together and then they would be scrimmaging it live versus the scout team. And then they would break up back into individual skills, and then they'll be back into getting the next part ready.
And again, like, I think also you were a little surprised about how much traditional block practice on-air coaching you saw at some of these practices as well. Can you talk about that?
I think that it's still pretty traditional for the most part in US college game. And yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of times they do an amazing job of getting players physically prepared and they play with great intensity. But tactically, the NBA game, EuroLeague, and international pro game is probably quite a fair way ahead. Not of every program, but a lot of them.
Well, and again, it relates to a little bit of just the evolution of the game and then where different programs are at in their phase of that evolution. But it was interesting to have that discussion with you, and obviously a lot of these different discussions. But the other one that came up was when you visited us and we started to discuss scouting reports and kind of reimagining or rethinking some of the things that we do in Scout. And I wanted you to bring out some of those ideas, but also to share some of the two of the ones that you shared with me. The one was to put the player's picture in the video of the scout or somewhere so that players would learn faster a little bit who they play or who they're playing against, in the context that we sometimes make an assumption that they do know, but they don't. And I've started doing that with the best players on the other team, especially for my young guys who haven't played against those guys before. And then the other one was the use of quizzing, which I want you to talk about as well. But let's talk a little bit about scouting report, and then let's maybe start with some of the things that we think, you know, that we do that maybe we waste time in Scout. What are some things that we probably overvalue in scouting reports?
I think there's a balance with what is part of the scout, what is part of your base system. And if you imagine a circle that encompasses everything that you need to cover for the upcoming game. And then you think of your base system. If your base system covers or overlays 90% of everything that you need to be prepared for, then there's only those few little wrinkles or peculiarities about the upcoming opponent that are scout based. And then there's not too many things for your players to think about, and they can handle that amount of information. But if your own system is maybe too adaptable, and therefore you're chasing your tail and you don't really have an understood base system, maybe it only covers 50% of the things that are going to eventuate. Now 50% are in the scout, the players are going to be well confused, and it's going to be too voluminous for them. So the more you can move into your base system and leave less as a part of the scouting process, I think the better.
And that brings up the argument that I make often, and that is the fact that by practicing a lot within the game context and removing a lot of fluff that doesn't happen in the game, you get more repetitions of those things that you would play against. So whether it's 4-on-4, 5-on-5, small-sided games, whatever it is, offense versus defense, and you're going through different situations every day, there's less things that are a surprise to your players when you get to scouting report. And that's really what you're arguing.
If you had a team that recognized opposing offensive actions perfectly, and that their communication was perfect, and their response to that communication was perfect, you wouldn't need to do Scout D, because they process, oh, that's a ball screen developing. That's a UCLA into ball screen developing. They process it so quickly, they can communicate it. Their teammates can respond to that communication. I mean, a lot of offense is just trying to override their communication systems. Can we do things more quickly than they can communicate it and stay organized? And then we get a disorganized defense to attack and breakdowns. So if you can build that in your players, then you don't need to save them from themselves by giving them a heads up by fist is wing entry, UCLA, catch, duck in, or whatever it may be. And it's that balance, because it's all opportunity cost of how you spend your time, and the time that you spend on the scout could have been put into building your base defense and vice versa. I think of a habitual adaptability as being what you're aiming for, and you have on the two ends of the continuum, habits and adaptability. To adaptable, you're chasing your tail. To habitual, you're a sitting duck.
So making sure that we're maximizing our time on task, but also making sure what we're doing in Scout is transferring, which I think is a question that coaches don't think about enough, is that what I'm doing or what information I'm giving to my players actually transferring and helping them? Or is this something that just makes me feel good, or I believe in a lot of cases produces a document that somewhat justifies that I did everything I can to prepare for the game? And that may be important for a coach, but it may be a different thing for your players, what they can actually use and transfer. So how do we know what transfers? Or what are some things that we should think about in terms of helping our players transfer information?
Well, first of all, I think you want to know how well it's transferring preemptively. I can remember many, many years ago making a scout adaptation, and we found out that one of our players didn't understand it when they mis-executed, and the other team hit 2 or 3 threes before we could explain to them what we were doing that would have taken that away. And so last year in our pro team, we used Kahoot, which is an online game that you can build your own quizzes. I mean, this is coming from the education background, to basically probe their understanding of the scout. As far as off-court work, they actually quite enjoyed it because it's competitive and they're getting quizzed and they love to compete. And we'd always put some entertaining questions in there as well. But it gives you data. So we could see, well, identify the shooters. If that was one of the questions, 99% of them got that. They obviously understand that well, at least intellectually, but they did really poorly on this question. So that's one that we possibly now need to address. And the other thing we would do is look at their individual scores. And then you could say to an assistant coach, in the hour and 15, maybe you have at the stadium with them before they play, sit down with X and just have a little one-on-one chat with them. And that there's these 3 areas that they were confused about. So let's make sure we get that right. And earlier in the week, we would often live scout and film it and then analyze that film. So hopefully you could actually have a video session about the way that they defended the opposing team before we actually played the game. And hopefully you could already identify, we said we're going to top block this, but that player obviously didn't understand that terminology. Can we address that with him before we actually get exposed by our opponent?
Kahoot, just so coaches know, Kahoot. You can go on there, but there's probably other examples, but that's the one you specifically mentioned there. And this preemptive quizzing or preemptive questioning of your players to find out what they understand or what they don't understand. But I also love, and I want to explore this idea a little bit more, of doing some live scout and filming it. Now, traditionally, coaches build through a week of practice, no matter how many practices you have in between, and they would focus on your stuff, and then, the last practice or the last 2 practices, get into your opponent's stuff. What we're basically saying, based on some of the things that you've talked about, is that more immediately get into the scout so that it's not a one-day learning experience or it's not a 15-minute learning experience.
And we kind of done that prior, but that was a request of our players. We played a game, and as we've all experienced at some point, we got a good butt kicking. We'd beaten that team previously, and I think they certainly wanted retribution. They got it for sure. And, and talking to the players, and I'm being so fortunate to have professional players where you learn so much from them after the game, and basically they identified what they felt we needed to do better. And one of the things they requested was, we basically believe that, the emphasis on the scout is good, and we want to live up to what you're asking of us, but we feel that you could give it to us earlier and have a more comprehensive preparation. So that's what we did. They're asking for it. They're telling you what they need, and you got to give it for them. And then you can continue to hold them accountable to it.
What other things do you think we can do better with scouting reports to be able to help our players? I mean, you went through the exercise when you were here. I gave you the scout, very limited time. And then you tried to learn the scout in advance of our game. And you talked about some of the, and you approached it from a player's perspective. You talked about some of the challenges in doing that.
It was a great impromptu learning opportunity for me. So often as the coach, we've spent a week or 2 weeks or whatever it may be, studying the opponent, learning it. And it's been our life for that week. And we think it's really easy to remember the scout and know what everyone does. So being put in the position of a player where, it was 100% unfamiliar with all the players. So there was nothing in my prior knowledge that helped me. And then having an hour before practice to try to do it, it really meant that I had to limit the number of points of information I could retain. I've sort of found maybe up to 7 max per player. And I think there was 13 players on the scout. And some of them, it was remember one thing. And if they're not going to play very much, maybe you don't even need to have them on the scout, because if they do happen to get in the game, you can probably convey to the players in that moment, shooter, and then cool, they've got it. They don't need to retain that in their memory throughout the week per se. But
and just to clarify, that you got a full one and we did not give the full one to the players. So the players didn't get all that information either. So you've got a full scout and the players didn't get those players that don't play.
Yeah, so it was probably a bit greater challenge in that regard. But then I'd also think, that's what I do. So if I found something a challenge, it must be even more challenging for the players. And then that's why I was talking about, we recognize people in life not by a number or a name, but by facial recognition. So I think when we present the Scout and we say it's number 22, I sort of don't think we're that attuned to finding 22. We identify people by what they look like. And when Torrey Craig said that blonde people looked alike, we adapted the Scout to help him, because you've got to remove those inverted commas excuses.
Well, and again, that was great feedback. And I think particularly there's sometimes an assumption, and certainly my veteran players, a few things. My veteran players, if I went to them and said, hey, give me a scout on this player, then a lot of them would know that player and be able to give me a pretty good scout. But we, particularly this year, had a lot of newcomers. And our newcomers not only would not be able to identify their number, but they certainly wouldn't be able to identify the face of many of the players. So it was really good feedback. And since then, for the key players, we haven't done it for every player, but in our actual video edit that I send to my players in advance, I put a picture profile of the key players with some of the key information, which is another thing that you talked about, which is the key information that we give players is, and I 100% agree with this, is that we don't need to write generalities on the scouting report. Can you talk about that?
I think it's actually an inadvertent subconscious concession by the coach that we don't expect habitual excellence from our team. If you're putting down, we're playing Russell Westbrook today, and it's going to be important that we build a wall and defensive transition, I kind of think hidden in that is saying that it's important other times, which possibly it is. But if you're saying that we need to prepare our D-trans to be elite so that it's ready for the day we have to use it against a Russell Westbrook, then we should be expecting habitual excellence. And so it kind of goes without saying that they need to be building a wall and filling the shell spot and whatever terminology you use.
Well,
so
let me give you an example that always comes up on any scout I see from someone, and that's you've got to box them out. Like what you're saying is basically that should be a habit, and that shouldn't be something that we need to write on every scouting report. As a general status, our players should be boxing out. That's something we need to write.
Stay down on shot fakes. I mean, maybe there are a few players in the world, but have you ever been like, okay, today, fellas, I want you to jump on the shot fake every time, leave your feet. So it's kind of you're telling them, I know. And so for me in that process, that was all the kind of things was like, okay, to make this easier, the stuff that I can just use my general basketball knowledge to know, I can leave that out. And then when I thought about our own scouting reports, I was like, I can make this process easier for our players.
Well, and that's really the goal of all this, and everything that we do is to make it easier for our players, but also to make it transfer, because too much information doesn't transfer. And I remember after one game this year that, I can talk about, hey, listen, we gave you the answers, and you're writing the test and you didn't apply the answers. But obviously that brings back to me reflecting on saying, okay, well, why didn't they transfer it? Did I give them too many answers prior to the test? And that might be part of it, or is it the way I presented it? Or is it just, again, a bunch of stuff that I value that probably isn't as important for my players? And this is a constant quest, I think, for us in figuring out an ideal scouting report for our players.
And the good thing at the pro level is they basically will tell you, not always kindly, but they're now at the level where they're articulate, they know enough and they care enough and they have the confidence, so they're a great resource. Ask the players. They'll tell you whether it's helping them or not.
And that's a general thing for all levels, is to be able to ask your players. And that basically so much of my learning has come from that question, is just saying, hey, do you feel like this is helping you? Whether it's a skill I teach a player or it's some type of new way of approaching something, even plays. Like I'll ask players, like we try a play or we put it in practice, and then I'll say, hey, does this make sense to you? Do you see the advantage? Do you see the potential? Different things like that, so that players have a feel for it, but also a buy-in. If they do feel that it's worthwhile, they help you obviously validate it to their teammates.
They will always win if they have an idea and you have a competing idea. If you railroad your idea, they subconsciously potentially will not do it as well, and then look at you like we said that idea wasn't good. So in many ways, it's you give them their idea. I mean, you have to have your non-negotiables, but you give them their idea and they will likely commit to it very, very well. And then at least if it is proving to be a little bit less successful, they're now receptive through that experience to the alternative idea. And that doesn't apply all the time, but a lot of times it's if one party has to adapt here, the coach or the players, you cannot control if your players will adapt, but you can choose if you will adapt. And that's one of the ways you can avoid having conflict, is you make the adaptations.
It's great stuff. And I want to get into this next part. And that was wonderful for Scouting Report. And I hope coaches will engage both of us in discussion on that online or elsewhere. But the other thing that I think you do a really good job of, and you spoke in my Art of Science of Coaching class as well, and you presented some of these ideas as a generality to coaching, but also just in our general discussions, is that you use metaphors and analogies to enhance understanding. Can you talk about that? And this is a conscious thing on your part, that you put time into learning and developing analogies and metaphors to be able to help youth players to pro players learn.
I enjoy Bill Simmons. So he obviously uses a lot of pop culture analogies to outline concepts in sport. And obviously that speaks to people with the success that he has is immense. And then Kenny McFadden, who, people around the world will not necessarily know him as a coach, but they will recognize Stephen Adams. And he did the lion's share of the work in preparing Stephen in New Zealand. And he's a master of using metaphor and analogy for motivation. So working with him, I saw how much that the kids love that. He's like the Pied Piper. Could we adapt that also to actually teaching? And so I kind of worked on it. And one of the great benefits we have in New Zealand is that you could be coaching a pro team and then still coaching a youth team. And that happens frequently just because we need more coaches, and you don't have the luxury of always allowing someone else to do it. You have to step up. And now suddenly you're trying to think, how do I teach these novices basically advanced concepts? And so you're probing, you're trying to find ways that maybe they could understand it. So, teaching spacing, for example, if you think of a medieval torture rack, it's a bit macabre, but you can actually play act this out too. Like you literally get out there yourself and you say, okay, imagine there's a rope tied around my wrist and attached to that offensive player. And there's a rope tied around my other wrist and it's attached to the ball. And look where you guys are standing at the moment. And you can demonstrate that the ropes are going to be slack and you can look quite comfortable. And then you say, stretch me. And so they'll start spacing out, and you can play act like getting taught and getting pulled, and you can make yourself look as uncomfortable as you like. And now they'll think this is quite funny, but that humor will really help their retention and understanding, and they'll enjoy practice. It's not fun to stop and listen to the coach explain something, but if it's funny, then it's kind of more enjoyable. And, then you have a little visual for them, and it can kind of be good too. Like we're trying to tear the opponent in half. We're trying to put so much pressure on them to guard the corner and so much pressure on them to guard the screen dive to the rim. And this is where it ties back into those rockets concepts, is of course is how you put pressure on them as well, is to attack the high efficiency areas of the court. So, there's pressure on them to protect the layup, and there's pressure on them to protect the 3-point line. So you've got to use those places to put pressure on the defense and to stretch them as much as possible till you rip them in half, dislocate a few arms and legs.
Beyond the violence of that metaphor, because some of them we already talked about snipers and medieval torture rack, but let's stay on the spacing concept, and then we'll come back to some of your other metaphors, because you have some metaphors that explain teaching spacing, which spacing is offense, offense is spacing. We know how important spacing is. So you've already talked about snipers, which are the players that are waiting for the shot. They're prepared, they're in spacing spots, and they're ready to play off of action. Medieval torture rack, that's your way of being able to explain spacing relative to a teammate and the basketball. And then you talk about lava. Can you explain that one?
Dave Smart is one of the best coaches in the world, and now you can learn from him with never before available access. 3 all-access practices and 1 defensive coaching clinic are available at davesmartbasketball.com. What makes these all-access practice and clinic videos so unique? Dave Smart has won 12 national championships and has a winning percentage of 92%. Dave Smart's force weak hand defensive system is world-renowned and has never been shared in this way before. Dave Smart has a winning record in over 50 games versus NCAA Division I teams, having beaten Wichita State, Baylor, Wisconsin, and many others. Dave Smart is recognized by Jay Wright, Mick Cronin, Jay Triano, and many other top coaches in the world as one of the best minds in basketball. Learn from one of the greatest minds in the game who opened his doors and shared the game with us from one of the most successful basketball programs in the world. Go to davesmartbasketball.com now to learn more and to purchase all 4 videos.
I mean, it's just, I guess, like a little common game that kids quite often play, you know, a PE type game. The floor's lava, you got to get there, but you can't touch the floor, and maybe they're going to step on a bench and then jump to the mat. And so if you're trying to teach concepts of where you want them to be and where you want them to spend time, and they might be 8, 9 years old, I mean, a lot of times you don't have to have good analogies in teaching with more experienced players, because you can kind of explain it and they already know it. So they go, oh, yep, I can decode that message and do it. But if you're talking to little kids, they don't know. And so, you know, like the mid-range is lava. You kind of basically saying, like, we want to get through here as fast as possible. I mean, so a tight end one, a little baseball analogy, and you know, obviously coaches do it all the time, put marks out on the court. You know, we want to sprint between the bases. So if you're spotted up in the corner and then you see that you can back cut your defender, you want to sprint from that 3-point line to the rim where you get to a new high efficiency scoring zone. That's kind of maybe getting from first to second. But if you don't get it, we don't want you to now drift around in the mid-range in that lava area. You're going to melt. You've got to sprint to that next base. So now you're sprinting to the next area, maybe the opposite corner. You might be sprinting back to the corner you came from, but we want to spend as little time as possible between those high efficiency scoring zones. So we want to get from 3 to rim as quickly as possible, and from rim back out as quickly as possible to create the space for the next person's opportunity.
Well, and that one obviously applies to shot profile and shot selection as well. So it's a really good one. Really, and again, every player or person can connect with that because they probably played that game at some point. So some other things you talk about don't let the defense get close to the ball when you're talking about spacing. Can you explain that?
So I think that a lot of times players drive and then they take 1, maybe even 2 more bounces beyond where they should. And now the help side is close to the basketball. You know, so we like to pass in space, not from the thicket. You know, and if the player's finding themselves having to jump and wrap the ball around someone's back or do something like that to get the pass, you've gone too deep. That pass was open a bounce or 2 earlier. And we want the defense to be rendered irrelevant. And we want to make them play in no man's land. So as soon as you see them coming to help and that person on the 3-point line is open, that's a straight, non-contested bullet pass to the pocket. And 1 bounce time, it might get tipped. You're not going to have that connectivity or 3 in a line, if people are familiar with basketball immersion terminology. And so giving them pass early, a lot of that is knowing your passing options as opposed to reacting to them. I learned that from Tab, you know, listening to him explain that to players. Of course, he was a previous podcast guest. And then a lot of it is having your eyes up. It drives me nuts to see individual workouts done. I'm probably going to be unpopular with a lot of people saying this, but you know, why the cones on the ground for the ball handling drills?
Yeah.
I mean, do we not want to teach them to have their eyes up? We make the constraints of the drill and force them having their eyes down. And if their eyes are down, they're going to see the rotations late. And then they're going to find out about them when they crash into them, which is well too late.
Well, it's one of the best arguments. Obviously, people would say, pylons are guidance, pylons are this, but the reality, as you're saying, is that when there's pylons on the floor, they're looking at the pylon, they're not looking up, and that doesn't transfer to the game. But hey, also to save coaches from Googling thicket, it's a dense group of bushes or trees. So basically, you're talking about playing in traffic. That pass in space, not from the thicket, is one of your terms. So I just want coaches to know, because I don't know if that's a common term in North America.
I don't think it's a common term here, probably, to be fair. But
wow, all that beautiful land in New Zealand, there's probably a lot of thicket somewhere. So that's great. Some of the other analogies, Coach, I mean, again, I just want to share some of these because I just found them so useful in some of the different things. You talked about take a hostage when defending the ball screen.
I stumbled into this coaching for a friend who was developing some 19-year-olds, and he was very keen for them to start their journey towards learning how to run ball screens. And, it's very hard for them to do that in the context of poor ball screen defense. So, really having to try to improve the caliber of the defense so that they can practice against good defense. And trying to get them to understand that when you hear the communication, and if we're going to be going over the screen, you need to get into the dribbler. And so I kind of stumbled into saying to them, take a hostage. I mean, if I'm the bad guy in a movie and I'm in a building and the SWAT team comes in and they're going to take me out, I don't run around in the room and try to get away from the screen or the bullets. That's not going to work. My one chance is to take a hostage. I've got to take the near and dear to the SWAT team and get real close to them. So if I don't want the screener to take me out, I've got to get very close to the ball handler, because they won't take me out then, because they'll knock over their own player and it'll be a turnover and they will get laughed at. So they will reduce the aggression on their screen. And now I take that hostage and I can fight over the screen. And it seems to be, in the time that I've used it, that little analogy, that's a movie scene that every kid is going to understand, and they make sense to them.
Well, again, you don't just use them to teach basketball, but you also use them to convey messages about how to deal with certain things as well. So one of the other things that you've shared, which I'd like you to explain, is the cracked iPhone.
And I think one of the recent podcast guests was talking about, conveying to the players shot selection, but without embarrassing them in front of their teammates, or even worse, their parents and friends have come to watch the game. And I use an analogy of, imagine that you're given $1,000 and you're going to have 24 seconds to spend it, because we're lucky we have a shot clock. And then they're going to start bringing out phones. And when you see a phone that you like, you hand over your $1,000 and you walk away with it. At the end of the 24 seconds, you lose the $1,000. So at the start of that process, if they bring out an iPhone 5 with 23 seconds on the shot clock to go, you probably say, show me the next one. And then they bring out one with a cracked screen. Next. And then maybe bring out an iPhone X. Well, if that comes out with 21 seconds to go, you hand over your $1,000. You're not getting better than that, and you take the shot effectively. As that time progresses, something you said no to early in the process, maybe you would say yes to now. So that same iPhone 5, if it comes out with 4 seconds to go, hey, that's better than nothing at this point. So I think throughout a shot clock, maybe in that last 6 seconds, that last quadrant, your shot profile, the threshold that you're trying to meet that says shoot, expands. But that analogy, you talk about that story to help the players, but now, then if they take a bad shot or a shot you're not thrilled with during the game, you can say to them, cracked iPhone. Now, no one else outside of your team will have any idea. They'll just think coach is crazy. And sometimes you have to be perceived as crazy so that your players can save face. And the player knows exactly what you're meaning. But when they're questioned by their friends or their parents, like, hey, why was the coach saying this? They can tell the truth if they like. But if they want to save face, they can say whatever they want. And it kind of allows you to convey the message totally, but they're the only one who understands, so they don't lose face in front of their peer group or parents.
It's such a great example, because the one that I relate to is obviously getting players to talk and communicate on defense. And players are self-conscious, especially the younger the player or the less confident the player. They're self-conscious, and I experience it a lot with my first-year players, newcomers. Is, you know, the veterans know the words, they don't know the words yet, and then you try to explain to them, listen, whatever you say, nobody in the stands knows what it means. So when you use our words, it's not like someone's going to correct you and say you're wrong, because they don't know. They don't know what you're saying. So I love the analogy. I love the example. And whether it's a cracked iPhone relative to shooting, shot selection, or whatever the words you use are, when you come up with unique words, it really does help your players, as you say, not just convey messages, but save space if they're wrong, because nobody's going to know otherwise.
We talk about it's better to be early and wrong than late and right in terms of communication. And if you think of defending a ball screen, sometimes we'll talk about, and this is another macabre one, if you see grandma crossing the road and it looks like a bus is going to hit her, you don't wait till you're 100% sure that the bus is going to hit grandma before you yell to alert her to move. And so often players do that. I wasn't quite sure if it was a screen or not. Like, they work it out when their teammate's lying on the ground, prone, you know, and it's like, you're just better off being early. You can always say mush, 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 mush. And then if it turns out not to be a ball screen by yourself, that doesn't matter, you know. So we talk about, do you want grandma to be hit? She's never going to be upset with you. Hey, you warned me the bus and it didn't actually hit me. You could have just said nothing. She'll appreciate it. And so will your teammate.
Poor grandma taking her hits. But Coach, a lot of places we can go with your expertise and your learning experiences. Let's get into something that we'll really geek out on a little bit and get really in depth with. And that's the theory of subtle offense. Maybe some terminology that people haven't heard. So let's start with first discussing what you mean by subtle offense.
I kind of learned this. I had a very good junior team a few years ago, and we were very simple offensively in terms of pattern, but we understood our pattern very, very deeply. And we had another team that we played against frequently, and their coaches, you know, had a lot of plays and structure, and we beat them every time easily. And that spoke a lot to the quality of the players, but they actually got frustrated with our coaching staff, you know, and after we played them the last time, they actually had a little bit of a go at us, like, oh man, we're doing all this good coaching and you guys are rolling the ball out and you're beating us every time. And when I discussed it with my assistant coach at the time, Rob Hartley, we worked out it was actually good, because their understanding of what we were doing was so minimal, they were never going to address it. And so I started thinking about the theory of subtle offense, that what we were doing was so subtle that if the opponents don't even understand what's happening to them, then that's pretty good, because they're not going to counter it. They don't understand. So it applies to a lot of things, but I think it's probably easiest understood in ball screen offense. And a lot of these things are, you know, I mean, Andrea Trinchieri had talked about a lot of them on the podcast. I've learned a lot from watching Etere Messina's clinics. Mike D'Antoni's been someone I've learned an extreme amount from, mostly at distance, and then fortunate finally to get to see it firsthand. So a lot of these ideas are not mine, but, you know, little things like the screen location on the court. If you're expecting aggressive coverage, or as you're sprinting into the ball screen, the proximity of the defense means that there's a good chance that they will be aggressive. And when I say aggressive, I mean a hard show, a trap, a switch. We characterize switching as being an aggressive coverage. Then you want to set the screen closer to the 3-point line so that the ball handler has space between the screen location and halfway. But if you're expecting a conservative coverage, the words are so variable. We would talk about mushes in New Zealand, but I think that's very much an inadvertent New Zealand type term. A push, a flat show, blue, ice, drops, all that family of coverages. Then we want to set the screen higher, closer to halfway. The reasoning for that is because we want our point guards or our ball handlers to run ball screens on what we would call a north angle, with the hoop being north. And especially against conservative coverage, because now we want them to shoot threes, not twos. So if we set the screen high, they can get post-screen separation, but still be behind the 3-point line. Their angle of their body and their momentum is all in the direction of the hoop. So I feel like this pull-up three against the drops, against the Roy Hibbert, is a very easy shot. But if you set the screen closer to the 3-point line, they have to get a lot more pre-screen separation. So they got to hit them with their best dribble move, because there's not room to get post-screen separation without going inside the 3-point line, and then they take a long pull-up too, which is, of course, what that Hibbert style of defense was trying to bait them into. And I thought, like KD, the year he won MVP and played a lot of point guard because Russ was injured, Curry, Lillard, these are examples of people that worked out, if we set the screens higher, we bring the maths back to us. But that's a very subtle thing. We're talking about maybe the screen location being a meter or so higher or lower. So the play is exactly the same. It's one ball screen, but we're doing little subtle things that means your coverage is going to break down. There's a lot more to it than that, but that's just an example.
Well, and again, it's this idea, I use the term distort, but I think you talk about duping or manipulating the defense in some way so that, again, we're saying it's subtle, it's unseen. The defense doesn't recognize it, so that it does give you an advantage. And really, it's the details. It's the details. And I would say I've attended so many good practices in the NCAA model of practice, just as an example. And I would say one of the things that I would say consistently is missed are these subtle details, particularly on ball screen, where it's a play, it's run more as a pattern rather than a unique decision point at the point of the ball screen. And, you either turn the corner and score, or you pass to the roller, or you move the ball. And there's not much subtlety in between that. And that's really what you're getting at in terms of this.
In that, I think one of the best ways to have a good ball screen offense is one screen, especially at practice, one screen. That is all you're allowed. Because if you execute that one ball screen correctly, and you make the right read, and you've developed the skills to execute that read, that's all you need. And if you didn't generate a good shot out of that singular ball screen, you made a mistake. You missed the read, or you didn't have the skills to execute it. It puts a great pressure on your team to execute. I think sometimes continuity offense, it's bludgeoning. It's just swinging a club in a room and eventually it hits. And with the longer shot clock, you can maybe run 5-6 ball screens, and sooner or later one of them breaks down, you get to the rim, but 24-second shot clock, you're not going to get as many score actions. So you have to be so much more surgical. And I've found that that's been a great way. We wouldn't necessarily always do that in the game, but in practice, 8-second shot clock over halfway, you've got one screen.
Well, it's an example of a constraint. And that we talk about that a lot in our terminology, and that's a constraint, something that shapes learning. And in this example, it's an easy to add constraint to your 3-on-3, 4-on-4, 5-on-5, whatever you're doing. It doesn't have to be a ball screen, but something that's important in your offense, and saying, listen, this has to lead to a shot. This has to lead to an opportunity. Now, it doesn't mean a direct shot off the ball screen. It means that, either you've empowered the weak side and they get a shot, or the roller gets a shot, or whatever that may be. But you don't get anything beyond that to flow into. And if you don't, then the other team gets possession and you go the other way. And it's an easy way to emphasize something and saying the importance of decision-making at that point. So I love it. And Have you used that within some of the stuff that you do?
Absolutely. Yeah, we would do that type of work a lot. And this is with youth players as well. I think one of the things that, we would have stood out in visiting Europe versus elsewhere and is how they begin that tactical development quite early. They're nowhere near as good yet, but even at under 14s, they've got the beginnings of being a mini little EuroLeague team. So when Teodosic or Slokar or whoever of the great guards runs a ball screen with such great tactical competency, they're probably into year 12 or 15 of doing that with live game reps, and they do know it like the back of their hand. Whereas a lot of times, maybe in our context in New Zealand, there are ball screens, but they're not run with great tactical understanding at under 15s. It's, the fastest kid gets a bit of separation and gets to the rim. And so we have people who are getting to be professional basketball players, and they're in year 1 or year 2 of starting to run ball screens with a real tactical appreciation. And, they're behind the Europeans. So I think it's really important. The game is ball screens, whether you like it or not. If you're trying to help your players to achieve their future goals, if you can make them a good ball screen player, then you've probably made them a good player. There's going to be coaches who will utilize them, and you've helped them with their future. So teaching them this when they're under 13, under 15, I think is appropriate.
And probably the other offensive thing is dribble handoffs that goes with that, right? And there's a lot of similarities and a lot of transfer from those back and forth, but it tends to be trending in terms of the game is that the dribble handoff and the ball screener on offense. But I want to also emphasize that what you're talking about, the theory of subtle offense, also applies to defense. And the thing that brings me up before you give your example is the example of the stick hand, of a defender having their arm out in front of their body towards the defender with the ball, is that creates this perception by the offensive player that the defender is closer than they actually are. So it's an example of taking away space without actually taking away space, because you're not taking away space with your body, you're taking it away with your arm extended. Do you have some other examples of this on defense?
I think anytime you can create the impression of pressure without actually having to expose yourself, this is good. So a lot of times, if we were extended in full court man, we don't really, I hate to trap up. So if our basket that we're going to score on is up and the basket we're going to defend is down, I hate trapping up. I know it can work against bad players, but I just feel if the players are any good that you're playing against, they just pass it beyond you, and then there's a numbers advantage. So whereas if you trap down, we sometimes call it a free double, because, and I think, you use the same concept with different terminology. If you trap down and they pass it back, that's free. Who cares? And so you get a trap for free. Maybe they panic and you get something better. If they deal with it well and throw it to the open man, they've lost ground and they've wasted shot clock to be in that position. So if we can create this belief where they see ghosts and they see traps that don't exist, we do not expose ourselves, but they are under more pressure than they actually are. And we use that, and I had a relatively critically acclaimed famous high school team. Our center was about 5'11" on a good day, and we were arguably the second best team in New Zealand, and we used full court man all year, and almost every coach we played against treated it like a zone press, which was great for us. And they had lags and they had bigs, but we were a man the whole season. And that was because we created the illusion of traps that didn't really exist.
Yeah, it's great stuff. And just shows you some of the subtleties that you can get into. And again, you're not messing with your base system. You're still doing what you do. It's just, what does the other team perceive in terms of some of those things? Masking it, duping, manipulating, whatever, distorting, whatever terminology you use That's a real important part of both offense and defense. And certainly something, again, as you said, we see a lot more internationally when we're trying to figure out how to cover certain actions, or certainly how to defend certain actions that they run. So it's great stuff. Coach, any other thoughts on this, the subtleties of, offense or defense?
Yeah, well, you've alluded to, duping the defense. So I think in many ways on offense, you're trying to dupe or trick the defense into protecting congestion, and then you attack the unprotected space. And on defense, you're trying to do the opposite. You're trying to protect the space and force them to attack the congestion. So for a practical context, if we imagine now middle ball screen, and we've got our ball screen, and let's say we have a slot on the right wing facing the basket, corner. If we are running that ball screen, if we can get the screener defender to really commit to the ball, they've actually protected the congestion. The two side, the wing and the corner, the congestion is to the right. So if we can get the screener to really commit to the ball coming into this right-hand side, now there's a good half of the court, 2-on-1. If we give you half the court to execute a 2-on-1, that's a guaranteed should be a good shot. So we've tricked the big into protecting the congestion. I mean, really the big defensively in that pick and roll, as this pick and roll develops, needs to be reading the filled 45. When they see that right 45 is filled, they should play much more screener oriented in the ball screen, because really it's going to be the dribbler's defender and the wall, the open denial of the 45, they're more walling the ball screen. And then if you think of that being the dam, the screener's defender is just a little temporary plug in that gap. And then they need to basically close the pocket pass. But if you can make them believe that they have to protect the space. So another thing that we would do subtly, and is show one ball screen spacing and then kind of midstream change it. So we may start there with a short action as an example of this. So if you imagine we have middle ball screen and the interior big is on the left side, so the right corner is filled. So when the screen develops, the big thinks that they have to protect a lot of space. And then in behind that defensive big, we're now shifting the spacing. So the person who is on the interior on the left sprints to the right corner lifts into the wing, but this has all happened behind the screener and he doesn't know it. So he really commits to the ball and really moves his feet and cuts off the penetrator, but the help that he was expecting has been removed, and now the pocket passes into huge amount of space with a 2-on-1. So that's kind of what I mean by duping, and something like that is why those coaches were very frustrated that we were doing so little and they couldn't stop the ball screen and we weren't doing a great job of coaching. They didn't understand why they couldn't stop the ball screen, because we were manipulating their spacing continually to break their coverages down.
Well, and it comes back full circle to where we started, which is, being effective while being simple relates to the details. And when you think about the Houston Rockets, certainly there's a lot of criticism about, they don't do much, right? But the subtleties of what they do is what makes them so effective. And, yes, individual talent and collection of talent it supersedes everything. I mean, the absence of effort and the absence of talent, none of us are good coaches. But when you look at just, again, simplicity and the subtleties of what they do, it's tremendous, isn't it?
I think, you can basically issue a challenge to any coach listening. And if you find yourself saying, I prefer college basketball because, there's more coaching and I don't really like the NBA, I would say the NBA is a subtle league. There's brilliant coaching, but it's subtle. And if you don't believe there's coaching in the NBA, I'd challenge you to watch more carefully, to watch more closely, to expand your knowledge base, because there's an amazing amount of subtle, brilliant coaching happening at that level. But you have to know the game to understand it and see it. And that's why it seems like they're not doing much, but in fact, they're doing many brilliant things.
Well, it's so true, so true, and I'm in awe every time I watch NBA games and spend time with coaching staffs about some of the things that they do, and even that we might not notice as people that have spent a lot of time on the game. So it's awesome. But a real simple thing that you've already mentioned, which coaches can start with, is go watch NBA games and watch angles and locations of ball screens relative to the defense that is being played, and it's just tremendous, just the simplicity of those manipulations that can cause, again, such subtle effectiveness on offense. So, Coach, listen, I'm very appreciative of you taking time. I mean, you and I could talk forever, and, it's just, again, a great knowledge base that you have. And coaches, if you're not following Zico online, he publishes some blogs, and he certainly is wonderful on Twitter and a great, great sharer and interactor with coaches. So please do. And Coach, thanks again for taking some time.
Thank you very much. It's been an honor to be invited, and hopefully there's some beneficial material for people.
There is, absolutely. And we will talk to you again sometime.
Basketball Immersion is one-stop shopping for video learning to stimulate your basketball coaching using evidence-based practices. Watch hundreds of videos covering BDT shooting, 0-second skills training, how we teach using small-sided games and a games approach to coaching, as well as team concepts and systems like trail trap, flow offense, two-sided fast break, and much, much more. NCAA, NBA, pro, high school, and youth coaches are amongst the thousands of coaches who are a part of our community. Go to basketballimmersion.com today to stimulate your basketball coaching.
To find out more about Coach and all we spoke about today, please take a look at the show notes for today's episode. I love to share the game and have basketball coaching conversations, so connect with me on social media. You can find all my social media information and all your membership, clinic, and consulting needs at basketballimmersion.com. That concludes today's episode. I know there are so many podcasts out there. Thank you for taking the time to listen to the Basketball Podcast with me, your host, Chris Oliver. Please subscribe and share the podcast with your friends and colleagues so that we can keep bringing you the best of what's out there and share the game.